Today we tried to hold a chat or a virtual lesson, and it was interrupted several times due to internet destabilization. So I'm going to create a screencast that will deal with our chat topics. One was supposed to focus on China and the second on Japan. And so the first thing we're going to look at is what made China vulnerable to foreign influence. So I'm going to show a little flipped video right now. And here we go.
The Qing dynasty was established in China in the 1600s and lasted nearly 300 years. European imperialism played a part in the ultimate failure of this Chinese dynasty. Let's examine the events leading up to its collapse. By the late 1700s, China was in decline. Westerners took advantage of their own strength and increased trade with China to their economic advantage. The British began making big profits by trading opium for tea. Soon, many Chinese became addicted, and payments for the drug disrupted the Chinese economy. Enjoying this lucrative business, Britain refused to stop, claiming its right to free trade. In 1839, the Opium War broke out. The Chinese and their antiquated weapons and methods were no challenge for the British, and the Chinese were easily defeated. Britain used its advantage to make China sign the Treaty of Nanjing. The treaty gave Britain a huge payment for losses in the war as well as the colony of Hong Kong. In addition, China had to open its ports to foreign trade and grant British citizens in China special rights. This treaty was the first of several unequal treaties that China would be forced to accept. The Qing decline continued. A large population, an extravagant imperial court, tax evasion by the rich, and widespread official corruption forced peasants to rebel against the Qing dynasty. The rebels won control of large parts of China, but ultimately the government crushed the rebellion. By the late 1800s, a modernized Japan looked to expand in Asia. Japanese pressure on China led to the First Sino-Japanese War, which started in 1894 primarily over control of Korea. The war ended disastrously for China. Japan gained the island of Taiwan, and Western powers began to carve out more regions along the Chinese coast. Chinese reformers blamed court officials for not modernizing China. In 1898, a young emperor, Guangxu, set out to modernize China with the 100 Days of Reform. But again, traditionalists opposed the reform effort. The country was in turmoil, as many Chinese were furious with efforts to change their country. They looked at Christian missionaries and foreigners who ignored Chinese laws as a threat to their society and their beliefs. And their anger was about to reach a boiling point. In 1899, a group of Chinese nationalists formed a secret society to drive out the foreigners. In 1900, they rose up in revolt across China in the Boxer Uprising. But it didn't last long. Western powers and Japan organized and crushed the uprising. And once again, with this loss, China was forced to accept concessions. In response, the Chinese launched a rush of reforms to westernize. They figured if they did not modernize, they would never contend as a world power. Reforms included allowing women into schools and teaching science and mathematics in place of Confucian thought. Within a short time, the Qing dynasty would be replaced by a republic. So what do you think? How can a country find a balance between modernizing and honoring traditions and culture? Is that important?
Okay, the video that you just watched has a lot of helpful information that will help you with the quiz. It's also worth going into the program section of your World History Guide, Pearson Realize, and go to the program section, go to topic 15, lesson 5, and there are short condensed sections within 15.5 that will help you understand China's struggle with foreign imperialists. And I'm looking at the table of contents for this particular section right now. It does have the flipped video of the Qing Dynasty collapse. It talks about the economic interest in China. You will need to know about the Taiping Rebellion and a week in China, and reform efforts, the fall of the Qing Dynasty, and the Boxer Rebellion. And there's some helpful interactive exercises that you can do as well. Now we're going to turn our attention on Japan, but before we do that, I'm just going to go over a few quick slides on China, but this is not all-encompassing. Okay, this is a very common cartoon of the situation that China faced, where you had all of these entities from other countries trying to split it up and create a sphere of influence. They're all looking pretty greedy there. So you see a shocked Mandarin in a Manchu robe, and he's kind of depicted in sort of a stereotypical, a little bit racist way. And you see Queen Victoria of the UK, William II of Germany, Nicholas II of Russia, the figurehead of France, Marianne, and then a samurai. So that's the surprising entity there, because we're used to thinking of imperialist as European. And we'll get into that more soon. So, because of repeated attempts at invasion, China distrusted foreigners and really did try to maintain a policy of isolationism. They did not want to engage. Britain gained a sphere of influence in China through smuggling opium. And one of the videos that we had looked up before talked about the Opium War and also the Boxer Uprising. And the Opium War was devastating for China. And also, it's a pretty good reflection of how they've declined in their strength, because it was once quite a strong nation for many, many, many years, decades, centuries, but they were unable to resist having their own people addicted to opium because of Britain's economic trade policy being enforced upon them. Alright, so they tried to make it illegal, and they couldn't because Britain wouldn't let them. So that just goes to speak to the weakened state of China at that time, after being strong for so long, and probably one of the longest lasting civilizations, culturally rich one as well. So just to recap quickly, First Opium War, 1839 to 1841, the Chinese government tried to halt Britain from importing opium. Britain didn't even allow opium in its own country, right? But war resulted. Now, the reason that Britain wanted China to take the opium is because of a trade imbalance. See, China, and this is smart economic policy for China, is that they exported much more than they imported. So that meant that they're making more money than having to expend. So, of course, the other countries, that wanted all these things from China, they're trying to find a way to balance that out and come up with something that it could sell and make money on and kind of balance out that trade. And unfortunately, the way in which it happened and the substance chosen was pretty nefarious. The Treaty of Nanking was an unequal treaty. The video goes into that a little bit, but it did force China to cede Hong Kong to Britain. It forced unequal trade agreements, and also to pay a large indemnity and open up 5 ports to foreign trade with low tariff. So basically, it was not allowing China to be isolationist. Interesting is that a few years ago, Hong Kong, which was British territory because of this treaty, reverted back to China. And so there's a lot of controversy because Hong Kong was so economically viable and did very well. And so there was concern about how it would do back in China's grasp. So China was carved into spheres of influence. So we know in other places there were indirect or direct rule. Here is called the type of rule is a sphere of influence in the late 19th century. All this meant is that outside powers claimed exclusive trading rights. U.S. did not take part in this, and they supported the open door policy. I think the open door policy is in the quiz, so you should know this. Open door policy was crafted in 1899, and it really sought to open commerce to imperial latecomers like itself, the U.S., and urged the Europeans to allow free trade within China. So the open door policy is just allowing free trade within China while respecting China's territorial integrity. So it's not trying to take territory, but it is enforcing that trade, that it must be open to all. So it was crafted by Secretary of State John Hay, gave all nations equal access to trade in China, and it guaranteed that China would not be taken over by one foreign power. Alright, so that was the result of the open door policy. The Boxer Rebellion, 1900. Patriotic uprising by Chinese nationalists against Western encroachment, and put down by imperial powers in 1900. Alright, so this caused a lot of resentment against the Qing dynasty government for not being strong enough to stand against imperial powers. And the Manchu Qing dynasty ended up being the last imperial dynasty of China. And they had had a good run from 1644 to 1912, but then it would fall. So just recapping the Boxer Rebellion, in 1900, they besieged the foreign embassies in Beijing. So they went after the foreign embassies, and a heavily armed force of British, French, Russian, U.S., German, and Japanese troops crushed the rebellion, and it was absolutely demoralizing to the Chinese. So one of the things that we'll go into later is we'll talk about a revolutionary named Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who sought to overthrow the Manchu dynasty, thinking it too weak, and establish a republic in 1911. And this would spark the beginning of a Chinese nationalist movement. He's really considered the father of modern China, and we'll learn more about him later. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out this video, and I'm going to make a second video that deals with Japan. So they had a pretty interesting way of dealing with this imperial age